This might be one of the worst issues to ever plague the entire video game market. That is, if we don't include the abuse of copyright, crunch time, the rampant integration of AI, the misogyny and sexual harassment. Okay, I swear it's at least in the top 10. My name is Bolt, and I classify myself as a retro mechanic streamer. Sometimes I'll showcase retro games through legal emulation, but other times a big gimmick of my channel is playing games in their original format on original hardware. I do this for two reasons. One, I'm a giant hipster that's desperate to be unique, and two, I'm actually a retro game collector outside of my streams. My collection is small as I only started it a little over a year ago, but it is growing, and part of the incentive for this collection was that looming fear that nothing is really stopping these classic games from being lost to the sands of time. I think Scott the Woz put it best when he said that the preservation of video games is different from the preservation of other art like paintings, movies, or television shows. Video game preservation is so difficult because you need to think about specific code and specific hardware. It's not always as simple as scanning a picture or burning a copy of a movie. But I think it's because it's so complicated that it needs to be treated a bit more seriously. Even then, I would argue that the preservation of art as a whole has gotten some uncomfortable pushback in the past year or two alone. With companies switching to a more streaming-based market, there's less physical media being pushed in circulation, and on paper, this makes sense. There are a lot of downsides to things like discs or cartridges being manufactured. Disk erosion is a thing, and specific hardware needs to be maintained. In fact, I'm currently learning how to mod and refurbish consoles on my own because I know that almost everything on my shelf has an expiration date that I want to prolong as much as possible. Plus, those plastic game cases aren't going to last forever either, and will most likely just end up in a landfill somewhere. And obviously, from a business perspective, it saves money to not physically print these games when you could just upload them to a server or a website that could be accessed by everybody. Would you rather spend $70 for each individual game, or pay half of that for a service that gives you access to hundreds? So I understand and even in some cases approve the idea of switching to an almost all-digital format of media consumption. The downside is that the more things are left digital, the less it feels like we're actually owning the products that we are consuming. And this issue is only exacerbated by various other industry practices. When a television show is uploaded to a streaming service, or when you buy an Xbox Game Pass, you don't actually own the games that are available on that service. You can download them to play them at a more convenient time, but the only thing you're paying for is the ability to access those games, and that ability can be yanked away from you at a moment's notice for any reason. Even when a game is legally emulated, it's hard to be certain if it'll be presented in a way that can be owned. In a world of corporate mergers and supposed tax write-offs being done to save as much money as possible off the backs of creators who put their blood, sweat, and tears into the content we consume, those reasons are becoming harder and harder for me to swallow. Yes, this does sort of get circumvented with the use of remasters and re-releases, but even those aren't a perfect one-to-one solution. Remasters can come with their own visual and audio glitches depending on budget, as oftentimes they're not given the resources necessary in order to properly function as a definitive version. And remakes often come with their own tweaks that do lead to different experiences overall. Nothing is really being preserved aside from an IP. Ideally, the solution would be to have a remake and the original packaged together like what we saw with Metroid Zero Mission, or even recently with the Tomb Raider remasters, but those are more outliers than the standard. Why go through the extra effort to make sure someone owns something as one package when we could just take advantage of something's blossoming scarcity? One of my favorite purchases from last year was a copy of Metal Gear Solid for the GameCube. It was pretty pricey for a controversial game in the franchise, and one of the first things I noticed when I opened up the case was that the disc had these cracks in it that signified the game was already showing signs of wear and tear. It's depressing that a game from such a high-profile franchise that, to the best of my knowledge, has never been re-released before, might never really be able to be legally played again. And this is for a game that I have no real nostalgic attachment to myself. If this happened to something like Ratchet & Clank or any other franchise that has had a profound effect on my childhood, then my depression would suddenly be kicking me something fierce. Nothing tangible lasts forever. That's just the nature of existing. But things have the ability to be immortalized and carried on in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it just feels like games and the tech related to them are never really given the ability to do so. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe all this collecting I'm doing is just a gimmick and a waste of money. But as long as I'm here streaming and posting random fun fact videos on the internet, I'm gonna keep building that collection in hopes that I can continue to preserve those experiences and that knowledge through my streams for as long as I can. If that sounds like something you're also interested in, then take a step into my garage and maybe we can enjoy those experiences together.